Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's October 28th. Halloween is days away, and my space-themed costume is still not ready, but it is time for another batch of deep space updates. And as always, we start out with the launches of them the last couple of weeks. And of course, we start out with one of the biggest launches of the year, Starship IFT 5. Yes, they launched and they landed both stages safely. They exceeded all expectations. Frankly, majority of people did not expect the booster to be caught successfully by the tower, but yeah, it managed it, and we were all blown away. Now, we'll talk more details on this later, but for now, we'll skip through the rest of the launches and come back to this one. 14th of October, we had Falcon Heavy launching Europa Clipper, and this was, of course, one of the biggest, is basically the biggest NASA mission, or any mission, to the outer solar system. The only thing heavier than Europa Clipper that has gone beyond the Earth's orbit has been the James Webb Space Telescope, and it didn't go much further. So this is off to Jupiter. It'll get there, 2030. Until then, it's going to be headed through deep space. And when it gets there, of course, it'll spend a lot of time getting very close to the icy moon of Europa and studying it with all its science instruments. I have a video on that. You should totally go and watch it. 15th of October, Falcon 9 launched Starlink Group 10-10, 23 satellites out of Slick 40 in Florida. 15th October, we also had Starlink Group 9-7, launching 20 satellites out of Vandenberg Space Force Base. And also on the 15th, we had Long March 6A, launching China's version of the Starlink constellation, the 1,000 sails constellation, which they're aiming to get something like 1,200, 1,300 satellites in the next few years. But right now they've launched something like it's 40 or so satellites. So the satellites are called Qianfan, and there were 18 on this particular launch. Now, the Long March 6 has also had issues with upper stage exploding, and as far as I know, this one hasn't exploded yet, but there's always time. 15th of October, also Long March 4C out of China, carrying Gaofen 1205 out of Jiquan. This is an Earth observation satellite going into sun synchronous orbit. So Gaofen 12 is a high-resolution satellite, nominally part of the civilian China high-resolution Earth observation system. But there's a bunch of different technologies, and these are almost certainly also used by Chinese military. 18th of October, Falcon 9 launched more communication satellites, another constellation. OneWeb, 20 OneWeb satellites were launched out of Vandenberg Space Force Base. This is actually the first OneWeb launch since the Eutelsat, OneWeb merger back in September of 2023. So that launched successfully, and it was pretty cool. 22nd of October, Long March 6 out of Taiyuan, not Taiwan, Taiyuan, carrying Tianping 3A, 3B, and 3B1 and 2. So these are it's kind of vague as to what these are, but they're described as radar calibration systems or satellites by the state media. It was originally thought that this was a single satellite, but it made it clear that there are actually 3 satellites launched on this, and it's used to calibrate ground radar equipment, to radar cross sections and things like that. 23rd of October, Long March 2C out of Xichang, launching Yagan 43 A, B, and C. These are reconnaissance satellites, absolutely for Chinese armed forces. They're all very, very secret. 23rd of October was a Falcon 9 out of Vandenberg carrying 20 Starshield satellites. This was the 100th launch by SpaceX this year, and we still have a couple of months left in the year. So the Starshield satellites built by SpaceX and Northrop Grumman, doing some sort of secret military constellation stuff in sun synchronous orbit. And finally, 26th of October, there's a Falcon 9 Slick 40 out of Florida, carrying 22 Starlink satellites in Group 10-8. And in a few hours, there'll be another Starlink satellite launch out of the west coast, that'll be the 200th Starlink launch. Anyway, yeah, the Starship IFT test, IFT 5. And of course, we have been watching this. You know, first one was amazing that it got off the pad. Second one, it was amazing when they actually managed to stage. Third one was amazing when they managed to get the Starship to fly halfway around the world and open its payload bay door and then disintegrate on re-entry. The fourth one was great because we got landings of the Starship and the booster, even though both of them were kind of worse for wear. And finally, yes, we had the boost back and the epic descent into Boca Chica at high Mach numbers. We got the epic sonic boom that was louder and bangier and boomier than anything we've had ever. So there's been a lot of footage from a lot of different sources. One of the most interesting things actually comes from third party. It was Cosmic Perspective. They showed that they got really good close-ups of the engine bay, and we'd seen that it was glowing from the footage that we had from SpaceX, and it was glowing between the engines. We thought that might have been like ram pressure or heating, but it's very clear that there is actually fire in there. So it's more likely that there is some, well, I mean, obviously heating is happening because they're moving through the atmosphere at high Mach levels, but also there's probably some fuel in there that's getting stuck and then that is burning. But yeah, we get multiple angles showing the arms grabbing it, and you can see the arms banging along the side of this, which, while that's very impressive they caught the booster this way, we know that they can't use arms with this level of control on the Starship because that would just smash all the tiles off the side. So this is still a problem that they're going to have to address. As of right now, they are proceeding forwards with IFT6, which is presumably going to be a very similar plan. It means they can turn things around faster because they won't need to have any license modifications. And it appears that in order to short circuit some of the environmental concerns, they pretty much sent a ship out, I can't remember the name, the recovery ship to go out there and fish the hot staging ring off the bottom of the ocean and bring it back. And from what we've seen, they're not going to use it again, but it might make a really cool exhibit in somebody's museum, so please put it on display somewhere. But by far, one of the most telling pieces of information that came out about this was, well, there was this guy playing Diablo 4 and I was on a conference call with SpaceX people that described exactly what was going on.
We had a misconfigured spin gas support that didn't have quite the right ramp-up time for bringing up spin pressure, and we were 1 second away from that tripping and telling the rocket to abort and try to crash into the ground next to the tower.
Wow.
Instead of the tower.
They were 1 second away from sensors tripping an abort scenario and telling the rocket to crash into the ground next to the tower rather than get caught. Now, we don't know who that person was that was making that statement, but we do know the person playing Diablo was Elon Musk. This is an bit of endgame content. I think it's called The Pit or The Pit of the Artificer. And it's tier 150. The idea is you keep doing runs and you the faster you complete them, the more levels you ascend and the harder it gets. And 150 is the hardest, and you know, it's super hard on end game content, and apparently, yes, he spends lots of time doing that, and I totally approve of him spending his time playing Diablo 4 right now. Anyway, other things that came out of this sort of background chat was that the cover that got ripped off, they were worried about covers getting ripped off the side of the booster because of the aerodynamic forces involved, and they thought it might happen, but they couldn't have predicted where it happened, and where it happened was pretty much right over a whole bunch of single point of failure valves that must work during the landing burn. Thankfully, none of those, or the harnesses, or any of the stuff around them, got damaged, but yeah, if that had, they would have probably lost the booster. Moving onwards, yes. Crew 8 returned to Earth after a record time in space for a SpaceX mission. If you remember, of course, it had been delayed partly because of Starliner, and then it was further delayed because of weather, but it came back just in the last few days. And Well, it appears that there was something unusual happened, and all four astronauts ended up in the hospital overnight, and then another astronaut stayed back a little longer. Now, we don't know which astronaut was involved, other than it was a NASA astronaut, so that pretty much precludes the Russian that was on board. We don't know what happened, and SpaceX aren't telling. There's no official report on it, and given that if there was a problem with the spacecraft, it will almost certainly have to come out publicly. But as of right now, it's more likely that this is just astronaut condition, just spent a long time in space, something like that. Very tired, maybe because of scheduling, they haven't had time to keep up with their exercises. That totally has happened. But anyway, yeah, it's a big deal that happened. But the crew are back home. Blue Origin, by the way, if you remember, during the last Deep Space updates, I put the new Shepard alongside Starship and said, which one do you care about most? Well, yeah, New Shepard, it didn't fly on October 7th and it didn't fly on October 13th, and nobody noticed because of Starship going on at the same time. Well, it finally flew on October 23rd. It basically is a launch for a new Shepard booster and a new capsule on top, and the capsule has been given the name the RSS Kármán line. So yeah, Theodor von Kármán gets a spacecraft named after him. That's kind of cool. But yeah, it didn't have any crew on board. It did have a bunch of science experiments, including like navigation test hardware that Blue Origin is going to have to put through its paces, because of course they're building their human landing system in parallel with SpaceX's, and they need to test their landing hardware. So anyway, that is now operational. I'm sure we'll start to see people flying on it soon. Now, and also during the last couple of weeks, one of the big sort of space convention events was the International Astronautical Conference, and that was happening in Milan. We had everyone turning up. Like Tori Bruno apparently gave a presentation on the Vulcan Cert 2 flight, where he talked about how when the nozzle was lost on one of those boosters, the whole stack lost about 2% of its performance, but overall they were able to make up that difference with the Atlas. But sorry, the Centaur. And yes, they are actually proceeding in with further flights, military flights with the Vulcan. But yeah, other stuff that happened there that was worth talking about. Well, VAST, if you remember, they have their little small single module space station that they want to be sending space tourists up to. Well, they launched a whole thing where they started to show off their larger modular space station, which they're pitching to NASA as another possible replacement or next step after the International Space Station, because there's by no means any guarantee. Well, there's no guarantee that any of the current candidates will be able to deliver on a space station in time to replace the International Space Station and therefore ensure NASA's continuity of spaceflight. So yeah, VAST's Haven 2, it will launch on Falcon Heavy. It's going to be about 5 meters longer than their Haven 1. It'll have twice the volume. It'll have docking ports on both ends. And initially, they'll be able to launch these things roughly every 6 months from over 2029, 2030, and build up a longer modular station before starting to branch out. And I say that literally because if you've got a chain and you want a complex station, you put in a node and you create branches, right? So it's not like a train in orbit. So anyway, that's one of the interesting ones. The other one I thought was cool was Axiom showed off their spacesuit. Now, they'd previously shown off their spacesuit, but they'd had it with like a dark cover, which was supposed to hide some of the details of the suit, hide the technology, and it wasn't representative of what they were going to do in space, because they were working with Prada, the fashion designer, and yeah, they finally displayed this. Of course, in Milan, it makes total sense to have a fashion show there, right? But yeah, it looks like a pretty darn good suit. I'm hoping it'll be ready in time for Artemis 3, when it's supposed to actually be worn by NASA astronauts on the surface of the moon. It's just one of many things that has to be solved before then, but I'm getting more and more hopeful every day. Now, in high orbit, there was some more drama because Intelsat 33E lost power. Its signal went out, and Intelsat were working with the maker Boeing to try to figure out what went wrong when Space Force said, "Hey, we're tracking a whole bunch of debris where that satellite once was." Okay, so yeah, it looks like Intelsat 3 has broken up. Initially, there was 20 fragments identified, but Exo Analytics, a private company that does on-orbit, analytics, situational awareness, right? They are now tracking 500 probable pieces of debris from this event. So this is a satellite that was built by Boeing back in 2016. It was launched, it got into its final orbit in like 2017. It took a little longer than usual because it had a problem with its propulsion system. And then they had another problem with the propulsion system that knocked a few years off its life. And then it exploded. And I should also point out that its predecessor, also built by Boeing, Intelsat 29E, it also had a failure on orbit from a propellant leak, which lost, this basically rendered the spacecraft useless. And given that this Intelsat 33 has clearly exploded in some way, it's quite likely that this is in some way related to the pressurized propulsion system. Therefore, there may be a common link. And a common link beyond being that they are both built by modern-day Boeing, which is going through a number of problems. And in fact, they had their quarterly results. And for example, they took another $250 million loss on the Starliner program again. And it sounds like they're looking to sell the spacecraft or the space division. Now, to be clear, I'm not clear at all on what part they are selling. It sounds like they're including Starliner. They want to get rid of that. It sounds like they maybe want to get rid of the satellite business. But are they going to get rid of those fat cost-plus contracts for things like SLS, where they're getting billions of dollars to funnel it to their various teams? I somehow don't think that would be part of the program. It's not clear who would want to buy this. It is a big question as to what happens to Boeing right now. So over in China, Deep Blue Aerospace showed off their new Crew launch system. It is a suborbital launch system that looks like they took a Crew Dragon system with a Falcon 9 system, made it a little shorter, and have basically built themselves a Chinese version of New Shepard. It is stunningly close to how SpaceX's vehicle looks in many, many ways. You know what they say about imitation being the sincerest form of flattery? So yeah, they've obviously been doing a bunch of testing on these vertical launch, vertical landing vehicles. They had a loss, if you remember, of a vehicle that crashed back in September. That was some pretty spectacular footage of that. They're apparently going to be doing some further tests with this, launching the capsule. They claim that they want to be able to launch it up to 150 kilometers, but that's going to lead to some very high G-forces on descent. But they're hoping to be selling tickets to for this on 2027, and I'm gonna say it's entirely possible they start undercutting Blue Origin, and we'll start to see some of those international people that go to the US to do this starting to go to China when that becomes an option. And to be honest, the average rich space tourist isn't going to be able to tell the difference between one thing or another because they're literally copies of each other, right? Finally, Astra, remember them? They just won a contract from the Defense Innovation Unit for $44 million. It would go towards work on various aspects of their Rocket 4 vehicle, right? The successor to Rocket 3, the rocket which had a 50-50 success rate. But Rocket 4 is bigger. It's going to be able to carry 600 kilograms into orbit. One of the big selling points that Astra always pitched was the fact they had a production line. The idea is that they can put raw materials in and very quickly have their machinery bend the tanks into shape and pop those out the other end and then put on the engines and the avionics. The Rocket 4 engines are called the Astra rocket. I don't know. Look, what they are is Firefly's Reaver engine. And the second stage has Ursa Major Hadley engines. So anyway, this is a $44 million contract, but only $2 million off it are paid out initially. This is a multi-phase contract where they have to succeed in various steps to show that their vehicle is actually useful. Astra are in the process of consolidating their staff, their facilities into their Alameda facility, closing down the Sunnyvale place where they were building the Astra spacecraft engine. That's the electric engine, which has customers for satellites. So maybe we'll see Rocket 4 fly. Not writing it off just yet. So yeah, right now I'm looking at a rocket launch out of Vandenberg at about 4:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. That is going to be the 200th launch of Starlink, and given the timing, we might see some noctilucent clouds. So I'll be looking out for that when I wake up, because I'm not getting up at that time to actually watch it. It's not like it's a Starship launch. And oh, by the way, shout out to the electric giraffe. I was at Makers Fair a couple of weeks ago, Mare Island, Vallejo, and I saw the guy. The electric giraffe is kind of famous. I saw Adam Savage giving speeches from the back off it multiple times. It's been to the White House. I saw the guy, he recognized me. He's like, "You want to ride it?" I was like, "Hell yeah." So yeah, shout out to that dude and his awesome electric giraffe. And also shout out to the Berkeley team that were showing me their 3D printer, which was operated on Virgin Galactic. It does a 3D print in like 20 seconds. They also had one that would do it on the Vomit Comet, like 20 seconds. Very cool technology at Makers Fair. But of course, it was also equally awesome to see just like old steam engines and blacksmithing and all sorts of cool stuff. So have fun on Halloween, by the way. Show me your space costumes, right? I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.